Welcome to Thursday's edition of Renew. I'm Pastor Tony. Thanks for joining us, and let's get right on into it. We're in the middle of a series we've entitled Faith 101. We are talking about how to develop a lifestyle of faith, how to have a strong, effective faith walk. And of course, in order to do that, we've already found out that our faith must be focused the right direction. That must be focused on God Himself. Jesus said in Mark chapter 11, verse 22, have faith in God. Not faith in God and other things, but faith in God. Solely centered on God, focused on Him. See, the problem is not a lack of faith. The problem is that we have misdirected and faith that is not focused on what it should be focused on. We got faith distracted and focused on other things and not like a laser beam focused on God. Now, this week we are talking about two aspects or two things about God that we must establish our faith in, must focus our faith on in order to have that strong, effective faith that we're talking about. First of all, we talked about the fact that God is able. Now, most people don't have a problem with that. They can look around at the creation and see that God is well able to do whatever. He can do anything. I mean, if He can create all these things, if He can create your life, then He certainly has the power, ability, and resources in order to take care of you. So that's really not most of people's doubt and issue. That's not where unbelief arises out of. We can square that one out pretty quick. But the second one is where most people have the hang-ups of their faith, where most of the doubts and the unbelief arise from. And that's the reality that God is willing. See, we must not only believe in the things that are in God's hand. In other words, His power, ability, and resources. We must also believe in what's in His heart. See, willingness is a heart issue. And that's why we spent so much time in previous podcasts before this Faith 101 series talking about the heart of God, the true nature of God, who God really is. And we looked at all those heart issues because those should give us the right perception of God so that we can come to the conclusion, hey, God is willing. God is not only can God do it, but God will use His power, ability, and resources on our behalf, even though we didn't deserve it or earn it. Now, yesterday, I think we said that faith deals in two areas, the unseen and the undeserved. Because most people have their receiving from God, their faith in receiving from God, what's in the hand of God, attached to their performance, attached to things that they merit. If they've done enough good works, or if they haven't done all the bad stuff, then at that point they feel they're qualified. But most of the time that leads down to a road of disqualification and doubts. Because we know in our own life, we haven't done everything we should have done, and we did things that we shouldn't have done, okay? So in essence, we don't deserve it. But that's why God deals with us according to grace. Grace is God's willingness to use His power, ability, and resources on our behalf, even though we didn't deserve it or earn it. In fact, that's the only way you're going to receive anything from God, from salvation, down to having your financial needs met, healing your body, getting victory in life, and answered prayer, is through the avenue of grace. And that, of course, is accessed with our faith. Now, we're going to look at a scripture today found in Romans chapter 8 that I believe is going to help clear up that question mark and those doubts concerning God's willingness. It's found in Romans chapter 8, verse 31 and 32. It says, "What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" You know God is for you. As a believer, as a child of God, His own sons and daughters, He is for you. He's not working against you. He's not out getting up every morning trying to figure out how He can make your life miserable and work against you. No, you need to get the right perception of God. He is working for you. Now notice in verse number 32, "He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all, how shall He not with Him also freely give us all things?" That one verse right there ought to clear up God's willingness right there. Notice, He says, "He who did not spare," or we could say withhold, His only begotten Son. Now, you have to understand that Jesus is the most valuable thing that the Father had. And if you were to ask God if the streets of gold, the pearly gates, all those other things in heaven were the most valuable thing he had, he would have to say no, because it was his son whom he loved, that he valued above everything else. That is the most precious thing to him. And notice right there that God was not unwilling to withhold his only begotten son. He did not withhold or spare his only son, but gave him up for us all willingly. Even though we didn't deserve it, we were ungodly and sinners when Jesus came. I want you to notice that God did not withhold Jesus. And see, if he's not willing to withhold the most precious, the most valuable, the greatest thing that he had at his disposal, in his possession, would he withhold anything lesser than that? Would he withhold healing from you? Would he withhold an answered prayer from you? Would he withhold a financial need from being met from you? Well, absolutely not. Notice it goes on to say, if he did not withhold and spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? So when we receive Jesus, the greatest, the most valuable, notice that all those other things come with it. If God were willing to pay off $1 million debt, then he is more than willing to pay off $100 debt. Because that's really what this verse is saying right here. This ought to clear up in our minds. It ought to do away and knock in the head every doubt and unbelief that we have, the fact that God is willing. Jesus came, didn't he? He didn't withhold Jesus. That tells us, demonstrates clearly the willingness of God to give us any of the other things that are far less in value, because they all came with Jesus. Well, that's all the time I've got for today. If you'd like additional resources and materials, go to tonycowan.org, and we'll see you tomorrow.